Have you ever tried to change one of your behaviors, only to find that real and lasting change often feels a little bit out of reach? That's been my experience, and it's been the experience of quite a few people I know, even in the church. And I don't think it's because we don't want to change. I think it's because most of us have never been taught a strategy for change that actually works. But when you look at people who really do change, one of the things that you'll find is that there are some consistent steps or a pattern that's often involved and often very rigorous when it comes to change. In fact, the patterns for change often feel very similar to something you might find in something like Alcoholics Anonymous or other 12-step programs. Dallas Willard famously said, "Any successful plan for spiritual formation, whether for the individual or group, will in fact be significantly similar to the Alcoholic Anonymous program." The problem is that most of us don't treat the changes that we need to make as seriously as somebody who struggles with alcohol or something else. And often we don't treat it seriously until it's too late. But once you're ready to accept that you're an angeraholic, a lustaholic, a dishonestyaholic, or something else, you're actually ready to get serious about change and to find a strategy that actually works. In Unit 1 of the Everyday Life course, we're going to explore the moral life that you're made for, including a 10-step process for moral change that you can start this week. But first, we need to look at how Jesus approached the moral life and contrast it with two wrong approaches that you might have in your own life. Let's start here. Jesus had a moral life, and so do you. But unlike you, his moral life gives us a vision for moral life at its best, what it looks like to navigate right and wrong in a complex world. And as we talk about in the Day 1 course, Jesus is way more than a moral teacher, but he's not less than one. Of course, Jesus came to save moral failures like us and to live a morally perfect life. But you also have to realize that he also is a moral teacher, and he's a brilliant teacher at that. And nowhere in the Bible is a vision for the moral life more clearly articulated than in what's called the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 through 7. Near the end of his intro to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus contrasts two approaches to the moral life before opening up a third option. And then he illustrates what the moral life looks like. Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, 17 through 20. "Don't think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all things are accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven." Let's unpack these three approaches and consider which one could describe yours. The first approach is simply to abolish all the moral rules. For some, the only moral life is to get rid of all the moral rules and just be true to yourself. But as Jesus said, he didn't come to abolish any sense of a moral vision. He says he didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets, which is his way of talking about the whole Old Testament. In fact, his vision is built on the foundation of the Old Testament, even as he transforms how we apply it in light of what he's done. It's a reminder that moral rules are actually good for you, and they lead to your flourishing. You could think of a fish, for example. One fish could say to another fish, "You have to live in water." And the other fish could say, "All this water is just holding me back from the life that I'm made for. I'm going to jump out of the water and see what happens." And then he jumps out of the water and onto the land. What would happen? It would die. Why? The water is the boundary for the life it's made for. God created us to live within good boundaries, and that's what rules are, and that's what morality is. It's the boundaries for the life of flourishing. The second approach is to keep all the moral rules. On the other hand, for some, the moral life is about finding and keeping a perfect, ever-expanding list of rules so that at the end of your life, God will accept you. And Jesus called this approach to the moral life the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. According to Jesus, this is just surface-deep morality. It's content to do external behavior modification, but it never touches the heart. It's what Dallas Willard calls the gospel of sin management. Listen to what Jesus says to those who practiced this form of morality. "What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of people's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immoralities, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a person. Mark chapter 7, verse 20 through 23. It's a reminder that true moral change is actually from the inside out. Imagine a factory that keeps producing a broken product at the end. And every time a product comes off the line, it's broken in the same way. You could manually try to fix every single product as it comes off the end of the line. Or you could go deeper into the factory and fix that, and that will take care of fixing the product. Or as Jesus says, a good tree produces good fruit. So the third approach, the approach that we see in the life of Jesus, is to follow the moral rule of love. This is the moral life that Jesus envisions for us, one that flows outward into our behaviors from the heart, that has experienced the love of God for us in Christ Jesus. It's not about abolishing the rules, and it's not about trying to keep an ever-expanding list of rules. It's something entirely different. In fact, if you were to go throughout the whole Old Testament, you would find that there are something like 613 different commands. And the scribes and the Pharisees knew every single one of them. And they had built extra rules upon those rules to make sure they didn't break any of those rules. But as a follower of Jesus, you might just want him to give you another list of rules like that. But Jesus makes it simple for us. And he sums up all of those commands like this. It says this in Mark chapter 12, 28 through 31. One of the scribes approached. When he heard them debating and saw that Jesus answered them well, he asked him, "Which command is the most important of all?" Jesus answered, "The most important is, listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other command greater than these." When you read the rest of the New Testament, you're going to find a lot of different lists of what it looks like to follow Jesus into the moral life you're made for. You can read Matthew 5 through 7, 1 Corinthians 13, Romans 12, Galatians 5, or Colossians 3 for starters. But one of the things you'll notice is that all of these lists are a little bit different, because all of these lists are actually just examples of what it could look like to follow the moral rule of love, as Jesus summarizes here, in your own life in response to God's love for you in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus had a moral life, and so do you. But his approach to the moral life isn't about abolishing all the moral rules, and it's not about keeping an ever-expanding list of moral rules. It's about learning to follow the moral rule of love in every area of your life. But how do you actually do that? One behavior at a time. That's what the next session is all about.